Welcome to our live stream.
We need 19 seconds of saying words. That's what I'm here for. I like that me and Gabby are in the same general location, and she is in a tank top and I am in a sweatshirt because
I run
that's
hot
how
these days. Not gonna lie, running hot these days. Also, I've been running around outside in the traffic and all the things.
I don't know
Trying
why
to
every
get
single
back to
human
the stream with you.
humans are in West Palm, man. There's everybody is in Miami and in West Palm, I guess, for Basel, or maybe the snowbirds have arrived. I don't know.
It's a
We
lot.
got both books today.
We do, because I wanted to talk a little bit about the difference of writing the first book versus the second book, and the Last Ceremony is a continuation of All This Healing Is Killing Me. It's a sequel. And when I was working with my editor, she had said, like, do you want to just wait until you finish the Last Ceremony and just sell it as one big book? And I was like, no, actually, because the energy is really different, which sounds like a weird thing to say, but I do feel like words and story have a sort of a vibration to them. They have a feeling to them. And I think the feeling to All This Healing Is Killing Me and the feeling to this, you can feel that there's something is different. Something has shifted. I attribute a lot of that to the fact that I wrote this book, and this was, a cleansing and a healing in and of itself. And that was happening during this journey. And then by the time I got over here, it really did vibrate differently. So much so that the labor of this one is very different. Whereas like writing the text of this one was the biggest lift, right? Like actually getting the stories out, because they were, protected behind like layers of conditioning and stuff. This one wrote a lot faster, but now like the audiobook, the drama, do you know what I mean? So now the actual like pushing this out the birth canal is actually really different. Whereas this one, once it was done, and it was just like out in the world. So it has been very different. Like I don't have any children. I know you have 3 children. I suspect it's kind of like that. They kind of have an energy of their own, even though they're coming through you, I would guess.
Listen, and how they come into the world is basically how they are. So there you go. But yeah, I totally agree. I mean, I have witnessed you through both of them. I have like watched you do it, like during All This Healing Is Killing Me, writing it. Like I basically was trying to make sure you did not die yourself. And like the Last Ceremony, I'd talk to you like, yeah, I wrote another chapter. I'd be like, what? Waiting for the like pain and anguish and all of the things. And it just wasn't there. I mean, the story is lighter just because of like the space that what you're writing about, but also the the doubt and the like, oh god, why am I putting this into the world, is just not there in the same way.
Yeah. The putting the first book out there, it is a huge act of courage. I think whenever you're creating something that is like deeply true, deeply personal, deeply vulnerable, right? It's a huge act of courage. But then you build that resilience, right? So the next time you put it out and you're like, oh, okay, it's probably going to unfold like this. There isn't so
Yeah.
much of the unknown. There isn't so much of the resistance. There isn't so much of the fear. So that part does make it a lot smoother. I also had a conversation with someone who said, I talked about the difference between the kind of vibrations of these. And when I said this one was kind of vibrating more love vibrations, we talked about the frequency of love being a bit higher, and that sometimes that can be disruptive. And like, you can feel that, like sometimes they talk about healing emergency, where you go and you start to get a lot of healing. That can be really disruptive to your system until you adjust to that next level, right? That you up level and you get acclimated, and then you're better once you kind of get situated.
Well, and it is like the inner, like you were writing All This Healing Is Killing Me and getting it out like during the story of the Last Ceremony, right? Like it's, like you want, like the Last Ceremony is all about like the book. All This Healing Is Killing Me is intertwined in it, right? You're like writing that story, and some of it is that healing, is the healing journey of it, right? Is like you had leveled up and like integrated a huge piece that like had kind of been floating around, right? Like there was a lot of like, I've done a lot of work, I've done a lot of work, I've done a lot of work. Where the fuck is this work not working? And then it's like by the time you're like, oh, okay, I'm here, I've arrived, and you did really like spend the time not rushing through. Like
Mhm.
you were like, well, I'm going to sit with this stupid integration, partially because there's a global pandemic, partially because I've been forced to, partially because I decide I'm going to do all these other things. But there is that space of like being like, the integration was so much more intentional and purposeful. And then I think then the next story can come through because you're not like still in it.
Yeah.
You're moving
Yeah.
through it.
You
And
remember when we had a conversation? I had finished the manuscript for the last ceremony and I was kind of like procrastinating on the publication process. And you were like, what are you doing? And I was like, well, I was like, I had one book. Like, who am I to have two books? And you were like, what? Are you like, please tell me you're joking right now? And I was
you're
like,
gonna write a whole book and then be like, publish that. Just gonna hold on to it for another 20 years.
remember, you were like, what are you talking about? And I was like, I don't know. It just feels like too much. And I've had to continue to adjust and expand my capacity for growth in this process. Like, it's not too much. I can do 20 books, right? I can have a voice, I can have a presence, I can take up space. Like, you're growing in these ways that are so unexpected as you're going on the journey.
I think the thing that's also interesting is other people witnessing you, like, are like, what are you talking about? But meanwhile, it's like you haven't caught up with yourself, right? Like that
Love
space
that.
of like
Haven't
other
caught up with
people
yourself.
like are seeing your like all the growth and all the things, and you've got like your pieces are all the way back here trying to like run as fast as you are and like trying to catch up. And I think that like a lot of times in that space of the trying to catch up, it's like um I need some confirmation from other people. I need some confirmation from the universe. I need some confirmation. Like, I need a little tiny piece of me to believe that confirmation. And that, like, that the world also wants to see it. I mean, like, you were like, do people want to know the rest of the story? And it's like, yeah, dude, people want to know. Like, it's like that the face of it is so interesting to see how those like how fast these stories came back out and like all this healing is killing you rewrote 4 times.
More like 10.
You rewrote
100.
completely 4 times and probably 100 in your head and probably a bunch of edits you never showed anybody,
Yes.
right? And this like idea of like it also has to be that hard is another piece, right? A book should take a lifetime, right? Like it's got to be painful. It has to be this. Whereas this one was like, I mean, there was some pain involved, and there were some chapters where you're like, ugh. But a lot of it was in the editing. Like a lot of it was like, here's the whole story, and then it was like, does this have a through line? Does this fit? You know, the whole narrative. Like, does this get you from point A to point B? As opposed to like, oh my god, am I going to share this?
Yeah.
Right? And
Yeah. And you said something really important about the kind of catching up process. I had read that testimonial on the live that we did yesterday or the day before, where my friend Peter reflected back to me, like everything that you came to realize about yourself at the end of the last ceremony, I saw in you the first time I met you. Like, it was so obvious, which is like so interesting to me that in a moment you can meet someone, you can see their light, you can see their potential, you can see their talent, you can see all of that, and yet the person can't see it in themselves. It wasn't until I finished the first book that I started to glimpse it, which is why I wanted to document it in the second book, because I wanted people to know you can see yourself differently. You can see what other people see in you. I didn't have that before.
I think for you, I think that it's a lot of times the most interesting because so many other people see it in you, right?
Mhm.
Like you are a person that people will tell like you changed my life. You are the kind of person where people are like they're excited that they get time with you, right? That that these things, it's like anytime you say those things, I'm like, is she joking? Like, and it's always interesting when you like go all the way through it, where you're like, I don't know if the world, like if I deserve to put this into the world. Like I it's surprising to me and other people like around us. And so it's always this like very interesting piece of like you always catch up to this, but it's like it is interesting to watch the process and to see like how it goes. Like you send me the thing and I'm like, okay, I have read this book chapter by chapter as she writes it, and like, and you know, you'll be like, send it, and like the fact that every time you send it, you're like, it's terrible. No, it's not great, you know. But this,
It's so interesting about this process as a process, right? And not as a product. You know, we tend to think of creative things a lot of times as a product, like this is a product and this is a product, right? It's like something that you make. But embedded in the product is the process. And the process is how you're creating yourself as you're creating. You know, it's this reciprocal relationship between self creativity and creating something external in the world. And so that mindset shift, that up leveling of self worth, or that expansion of self awareness, like all those things, I think that is the journey of being human. I mean, I think some of us are born with traits where we skew a little bit more confident or a little bit more insecure or stuff like that. But I think it's very rare that we see ourselves in our wholeness. That's really difficult. It's really difficult to see the label on the bottle, to see the water you're swimming in, to see yourself in that way. It's very challenging.
and I think that like one of the pieces is always interesting is in the reflection of like looking back, right? Like in that space of being like, you know, like the way that you do the research for the books, like a lot of it is like going through old text messages and going through pictures and going through these pieces where it's like the reliving it, you're seeing it from the outside, even though you have a view from the inside, right? And it's like that flipping of it back and forth changes the entire perspective.
Mhm.
And that space is so interesting to be able, like when everybody else is looking at it from the outside, they're not seeing your internal perspective until you show it, right? And that's like what those books are, right? It's like this idea of like everybody could be like, oh, Gabby just travels around the world and doing interesting things and whatever, whatever. Where is she? I mean, the amount of times people say, where is she now, to me, like, is hilarious when I know that the thought process that goes through this is this very different experience, right? And so the ability to be able to like look at how it comes together. What are you breaking over there? And like how those things come together and how the serendipity of it all. But sometimes it's not the serendipity. It is the like, I'm waiting. Oh, like I don't know where I'm going. And like, all right, I'm just gonna keep going and see what happens. That it's
But what you're saying is exactly the reason why I've always been addicted to memoir, is because I always desperately want to know what's happening on the inside.
Mhm.
It's like I see people and I see them, whether they're successful or unsuccessful, or they appear, you know, brave and bold and happy, or they appear, you know, something else. Like I've always craved knowing what is your internal experience and how does it relate to my internal experience. Like to me, relating to people inside to inside as opposed to like outside to outside is like what makes me feel good. I want to know, like, what are you thinking, what are you feeling? And that, to me, that's what memoir is. It gives you someone else's skin. You're walking in someone else's footsteps, right? You're like embodying someone else's experience. That's what I love about memoir.
That's like my favorite, like memoir and like long form podcasts, right? Like where you're like, it's not just the interview that you could have heard with 12 people, but like like you're going on Rich Roll, right? Like, and you're like all the way in it, and you're like, whoa. Like sometimes I'll be like listening to him, right? And then it's so interesting, and then you buy the book, and you're like, he got deeper than the book, right?
Yes. Yeah.
And that part to me It's like
Yeah.
I love knowing the like secret pieces of it. I love reading people's books and then hearing a little bit more. I love that space of like understanding that Elizabeth Gilbert like didn't even quit her waitress job until well after Eat, Pray, Love came out, right? Like this idea that like not always just easy and it doesn't always just come, and like that there's like all these steps along the way, right? You look at like all the different stuff where you're like, oh, I like failed, succeeded, failed, succeeded, like, and then it's like this like never, it's never a straight line.
Yeah.
And
Until you write it all down, the other thing that I couldn't see until I got through this manuscript was how generous the universe was, how much grace, how many guides, how many mentors, how many miracles, because the emotional charge often of the things that happen that we don't like tend to be bigger or stronger than all those little things that someone does to support or to heal or to help, all those little gems. And once I wrote it all down, I just felt so much gratitude. And it wasn't a gratitude that was like generated, like make your gratitude list, write in your gratitude journal. It was like a deep well of like, thank you. Thank you. Oh my God, thank you. Seeing that 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 generosity throughout the whole journey.
well, and I think like one of the images I always get whenever I have that thought is like, dude, my guides are working hard to put me in the right direction. Like they're like, where the fuck is she going now? Right? What is she like? Get her back on course over here.
Yeah.
Run her into this person. Do this thing. Like have that thought, right? And like I'm like, oh, they're the hardest working guides out there. But like, it is that like the silliness of like how those things come together, and how if you like you can't, sometimes you can see it in the moment like it's, but it's pretty rare. Most of the
It's
time it's in
hard,
the
especially if
reflection.
you're just like trying to keep your head above water. Like, can I make it through the day? Can I make it through the week? Like, it's only for me in the reflection that I really was
Mhm.
able to see that there was so much good that was happening all the time. Because in our experience, we can be really distracted by fear or pain or worry or anxiety. We can just be really distracted, and it can be hard to settle our nervous system. So much of this is about like the physiological healing. But then in reflection, in review, in introspection, in that, mirror reflection, we can see it differently.
And I think in that reflection and in the introspection of it, it's like then you can also see it in the present and in the future, right? Like you really, like if that is the practice, like this is what we should be learning in school, right? But like it is this space of like the practice of like, I mean, which is why gratitude like journals work, right? This is why it is good at the end of the day to be like, I am grateful because I got stopped at this stoplight and then this crazy car went flying through, right? It is that like the thing that happened that stopped the other thing from happening, or the
Yeah.
like the pieces of it where you're like, I don't know why this thing will not work. And then you find out like whatever you were about to do was about to be the most terrible mistake.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's in the good, right? You're like, I have no idea why I did this outside of my norm, but then I met this person and I did this thing, and like how those connections. I was at this like networking thing last night, and the guy was talking about not breaking the chain. And he was like, all of you are now connected as a chain. And like, also remember after someone connects you and connects you and connects you to say thank you back at the beginning. And like that thank you then starts a whole new chain.
Yeah.
And like I love the idea of like the links like coming together, and that if you don't seal it up, like it's gonna come apart. And that like idea of like, I feel like that happens so much in life of like your past thing, like you have to be able to reflect, you have to be able to have some gratitude, you have to be able to look backwards to be able to like flip it into it. And so much of the time you're like, I don't want to.
Yeah, and it's hard to take the time to do something like this. It's really hard to take the time to go this deep. And so like even if people can just spend a little bit of time, you know, like you said, like end of the day reflection, maybe you can't write a novel about your life, but even a little bit of reflection goes a real long way.
I think that piece is also the idea of if you don't know, it will come to you,
Yeah.
right? Like if you don't, you're gonna get really sick. If you don't, you're gonna have some kind of accident. If you don't, you're gonna like those are the things that like show up to be like, hey, go reflect, like sit down, have a seat, right?
Yeah.
And like in that space of like when you start bumping into the wall, when you start having the sore throat, it's like, okay, like I think I need a minute to be able to sit in the reflection. Maybe I don't have to like trek myself all over whatever to get there, but it's like, oh, okay, like I can get there.
So get your ass to Amazon in 8 days.
Buy the book, people.
Get your ass to Amazon 8 days and buy the book. I'm super grateful to Jamie for having these daily conversations with me and for supporting this whole book process. And
Listen,
I'm
man, it's my
excited
favorite.
to hear what everybody thinks. Jamie's in the book. She's mentioned in it, as well as a lot of other people who've been in my life the last couple of years. So maybe you'll recognize yourself. If you're watching this. All right, guys. See you tomorrow. Bye.
Bye.